A very good evening, Zimbabwe. Welcome to LiveTalk Women's Roundtable, where we speak about issues affecting women. We're coming to you live from Studio 7 at the Voice of America in Washington this Thursday, May the 5th, 2023. And I'm your host, Marvelous Mhlanga-Nyahuye. And tonight on the Women's Roundtable, we're continuing our discussion on World Press Freedom Day and some of the challenges facing female journalists. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Wednesday marked World Press Freedom Day by drawing attention to detained Wall Street Journal reporter Ivan Geskovich. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sainer reports from Washington.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken joined United Nations senior leaders and others in saying that freedom of the press is under attack across the globe.
We know that journalists around the world are increasingly under siege, and under siege in a whole variety of ways. That's now manifested itself once again very powerfully in evidence to detention and incarceration in Moscow, profoundly unjustly, for doing his job. We're intensely engaged with the Russians to seek his freedom, to seek his immediate release.
Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich appeared at a Moscow court last month and was denied release on bail. He was arrested for alleged espionage in a case that has drawn international condemnation. Blinken said Russia is wrongfully detaining people to use them as political pawns.
That's press torture.
Two protesters interrupted the Washington Post event with Secretary Blinken Wednesday, calling for freeing of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who is imprisoned in the UK and faces espionage charges in the US. The incident prompted moderator David Ignatius to say, "We're here to celebrate freedom of expression, and we just experienced it." At the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres had this message on World Press Freedom Day.
Stop the threats and attacks. Stop detaining and imprisoning journalists for doing their jobs. Stop the lies and disinformation. Stop targeting truth and truth tellers.
Press freedom watchdog Reporters Without Borders released its 2023 World Press Freedom Index Wednesday, which analyzes the work environment for journalists in 180 countries and territories. The report for 2023 says the situation is very serious in 31 countries, difficult in 42, problematic in 55, and good or satisfactory in 52 countries. Norway was the country with the most press freedom, taking the #1 spot in the index. The United States was 45th, while Russia dropped to 164th, China ranked second to lowest at 179, and at the very bottom of the list was North Korea. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
And on World Press Freedom Day, which was commemorated yesterday worldwide, some journalists commemorated the event at a fact-checking and verification masterclass organized by Africa Check in partnership with the U.S. State Department, held in Bulawayo. Event organizer and executive director of Fact Check Zimbabwe, Lefakani Nare, talks about the importance of fact-checking in the advent of fake news.
The World Press Freedom Day liqhakathekile kakhulu kithi njengentatheli izindaba kanye la koZulu konke ngoba kukhona okuningi abahlangana lawo lapho bethe besenza lo msebenzi awulula njengeminye imisebenzi ngoba intatheli ilapho uzitholise endaweni lapho ezombusazwe emaralini okusukube lokuxokozela kwezinye izikhathi kube khona ukungazwisisani agcine ephatheke phakathi kwabo khona konke khona lokho so siyananzelela ukuthi kuqhakathekile nxa sithakazelela ilanga elinjengaleli ukuthi uZulu afake uZulu abone ukuthi kuyini esingakwenza ukuthi ama-journalist ethu aphephe.
That there was Lifakani Nare, the executive director of the Fact Check Zimbabwe. Studio 7 reporter Rutendo Mawere speaks about some of the challenges female journalists face, which include sexual harassment in newsrooms. Let's hear what she had to say.
As we celebrate World Press Freedom Day, as female journalists, we face a lot of challenges as we execute our work. These include issues of safety and security. We notice that a lot of journalists get arrested or harassed or probably jailed for just doing their work. And this is a major challenge as we do our work. If you look at the MISA report, it states that in 2022 alone, about 36 journalists were either harassed or tortured or disturbed while they were working or arrested. And it is even of more concern that we are now in an election year, and this harassment of journalists and arrests are likely to increase.
But it's political persecution. It's got nothing to do with the law, but just to persecute me.
And I think another concern for us female journalists is also sexual harassment in some newsrooms. We realize that most of these people in leadership in most media houses are male, and sometimes they ask for sexual favors so that the stories are either taken and published.
That there was Studio 7 reporter Rutendo Mawere speaking about some of the challenges facing female journalists. And a young journalist, mumwe womutori wena wechidiki Charles Chiunga anoti mihoro yavari kuwana haisi kuvakwanira. Let's hear what she had to say.
Machallenges atiri kusangana nawo semajournalist, chekutanga masalaries mashoma, pay yaunenge uchiwana haitokwanise kana kubhadhara rent, even pay fees. Chechitu kutya kusungwa chaiko, ukabuda kunzoko uchida unokavha a certain story, unenge uchitotya kuti ukasangana nemapurisa either une press card kana kuti hauna, vanogona kukubata ubva vatongokusunga. Saka
uyo anga ari mutori wena wechidiki Charles Chiunga achitaura ari muHarare. Let's now take a break, but please stay tuned. We'll be right back.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
And for those that have just joined us, please note that we are streaming live on all our Facebook pages, VOA Shona, VOA Studio 7, and VOA Ndebele. We're also live on YouTube at VOA Zimbabwe. And to discuss this issue, we are joined by Nonhlanhla Ngwenya, Linda Mujuru, and we're also expecting Samantha Kurea, who's popularly known as Gonyeti, and also Sharon Njobo, a former journalist. But I'm trying to see who we have on the line with us. I'm not sure, who do we have on the line with us? Hello?
Hi, Marvelous. Hi, this is Sharon. I'm not sure if you're able to hear me.
Yes, who have I got on the line? I'm so sorry because the lines keep dropping. Aha, okay, Sharon Jobo. How are you, Sharon?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for stepping in, because I think we had two other journalists from Zimbabwe, but their lines just dropped off. So I'll start off with you, just saying you're a former journalist yourself, and we look at yesterday was World Press Free Day, and can you just take us into, do you think the environment that you operated in when you were a journalist has changed when we look at female journalism?
Yes, absolutely. So I was a journalist in the 90s, right up until I moved to North America. And I now work in international development. And I realize the criticality of journalism in protecting human rights. And if I can take you back to International Women's Day, this year our focus for International Women's Day was on innovation and technology for gender equality. And when I started as a journalist, we were not as advanced technologically. And while we may celebrate the advancements in technology, I think for women journalists, we need more equity in terms of access to technology. Because I believe that will open up spaces for the female journalists to participate in a more equitable manner and to bring forward not only their voices and experiences, but also the voices of the women that they more often report on. And I believe as we are reflecting on Press Freedom Day, that a lack of access or limited access to technology is an emerging, and it's a real barrier to press freedom. And this is more pronounced for women journalists because they tend to be disproportionately represented among those with limited or no access to internet. For example, I think we cannot talk about Press Freedom Day today without addressing the issue of access to stable and uninterrupted internet connectivity. And we are talking also about access to devices that allow women to produce in a safe manner quality journalism pieces, quality stories, and to also connect with news sources globally and to be able to disseminate that information. I think that the limited access to technology is a big threat to press freedom, especially when it comes to women journalists.
We had there one of our female journalists who actually work for Studio 7 lamenting that there are a lot of challenges that they face as female journalists operating in Zimbabwe. And she also pointed out the issue of women not being given a chance to take up decision-making positions in the newsroom, also talking about some of the big bosses or some of the senior journalists asking for sexual favors to enable a female journalist to get a top position. What's your take on that?
It's sad that this is something that we are still talking about today. And at the core of this issue of harassment of female journalists, it's about the power relations and access to capital and ownership. Who owns the forms of publications, the means of publications? We find that the publications are owned by mostly by men or by entities that are run by men, and the board members are men. So until women have an equitable stake in terms of owning the means of publication, sadly we will continue to have this. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that as a woman in the diaspora, perhaps this is where I, maybe with you and along with other journalists that are no longer in Zimbabwe, perhaps that is a space that we need to look into to contribute financially to changing the ownership space in Zimbabwe when it comes to who owns the means of publication, who owns the media in Zimbabwe. We need to shift the power and to make sure that we are bringing women not only to work within the media houses, but to own. And so that way you can meaningfully participate.
And, you know, one of the younger journalists that was, who sent in a video, talked about the issue of remuneration, saying that from the salary that she gets, she cannot even afford to pay her rent and other basic commodities. What can be done to ensure that the young female journalists that are coming into this profession are also paid adequately?
the issue of remuneration is a national one, especially when it comes to Zimbabwe, because of the economic challenges that the country is faced with. And it is more of a chicken and egg situation because it takes the journalists to report accurately about what is going on. And yet, at the same time...
I was waiting. That is there somebody else? Go ahead.
Okay. And yet, at the same time, if the journalists are not adequately remunerated, the level of professionalism and objectivity is threatened. It can very easily be compromised because we have seen cases where people have to choose between having a job that will feed their family and standing up for what is right. And some of these things are concepts, right, which it would be unfair to have, especially the women, make a decision of whether she has food to put on the table and morals. So we cannot moralize some of these issues. It's abuse of power, it's economic issues, it's just the difficult condition that Zimbabwe finds itself in. And yet, at the same time, one of the things that I am learning, and I say this from a position of privilege, where I'm sitting here in downtown Toronto, is that there are global opportunities that I think as women journalists, we can open ourselves up to, where we are seeing that there are more ways of operating as a journalist outside of working for a specific media house. There is blogging, there is vlogging, there are other ways that technology allows journalists to operate outside of the traditional and the mainstream. Which unfortunately takes us back to access to technology, but those are things to consider.
Thank you so much. The Sharon Jobo, a former journalist, Regaitimbo Tora mumwe mnyarekani wedu ndiri kunzwa kuti tina muzvare Linda Mujuru vanova ivo mutori wenhau zvakare vari kuZimbabwe. Nhare dzavo dzanga dziri kumbonetsa asi ndinofara kuti tazokwanisa kuvawana. Tinokuchingamidzai pachirongwa.
Thank you so much.
Looking at Press Freedom Day, as a female journalist yourself there in Zimbabwe, what would you say are some of the challenges that you are facing in carrying out your work?
Machallenges akawanda ari kusanganikwa nawo nevatori venhau vechidzimai muZimbabwe. Chekutanga kunyanya inyaya yekushaya zvishandisiro pabasa. Zvishandisiro ndikureva izvo zvakaita sematransport, kuenda kumaassignments, makamera, marekodha aunoida kuti uite basa rako sajournalist wechidzimai. Saka nyaya dzekushaya zvinhu zvakaita setransport zvinozokonzera kuti majournalist ange achizotakurwa nemasource, zvinozoita kuti izvonezvi dzinozobuda dzinenge dzisiri balance, dzisiri fair, ende zvinoita kuti dzive biased, dzakatarisana nenyaya kunyanya dzepolitics, nekuti hapana zvikwanisiro zvekushandisa pamafemale journalists aende kumaassignments avo. Tichitata zvakare nyaya dzegovernment censorship. Tichitata muZimbabwe inyaya inoafekta zvese varume nevakadzi. But isu seGlobal Press Journal takaita tsvakurudzo tikaona kuti government censorship ndiyo kunyanya kuafekta vatori venhau pasi rose, ende Zimbabwe iri amongst vanhu vari kuafektwa ava. But tichitasa kuti muZimbabwe nyaya dzedisinformation zvakare kunyanya kwakutewo vatori venhau ende vakadzi ndivo vamwe vari pakati pekuafektwa nenyaya dzedisinformation, information yekunyepa inonyanya kutageta majournalist kuti agopedzera anyora zvinhu zvekunyepa. Saka nyaya dzeharassment nekutretenwa izvoitika takatata nemajournalist again kuti unogona kuharaswa nesofi chaiyo, unogona kuharaswa newsroom matiri kutauramo, mungave mugovernment newsroom, mungave muprivate newsroom. But nyaya dzeharassment tanenguva tichizitaura nezvazvo asi dzinoramba dzichiitika. ende zvinoafekta mafemale journalist kuti unotadza kuzoita basa rako zvakanaka nenyaya dzeharassment.
But Makadaro, Mshare Linda, would you please stay on the line? I understand we have a caller from South Africa, so let me just take them quickly before I carry on with you. Hello, caller Makadi, South Africa.
Ndiripo zvangu makadiwo muri sei tete Marvelous.
Aiwa tiri wadi tafara kumbonzwa munhu wechidzimai vachimbofonawo pachirongwa chedu, taurai tinzwe.
Inini shoko rangu rinonyanyondirwadza nderekuti especially munyika medu meZimbabwe vanhukadzi kubva kana kuvanasikana munoona kuti macases ekuti vana vanombunyikidzwa vachitorwa vachipiwa varume vakuru chembere dzechipostori, vana vachikanganiswa vachifa, zvese zvichinyararwa, utungamiri huchingonyarara, vanhukadzi tiri muusungwa hunhapwa mukati menyika yedu. Asi ndichitarisisa kuti vanzi varume vakabva muvakadzi, vakadzi takatsungirira pane zvese, asi iye zvino kana majournalist echikadzi, kana vaimbi vechikadzi, kana chii chechikadzi, inini chinozonyanyondirwadza especially pautungamiriri. Amai Munangagwa chaiwo amai venyika vanoona zvimwe zvinhu zvichiitika, saamai vanofanirwa kupota vachidzora nekusimbisa nekushingisa iye zvino Zimbabwe yakuita fanika nyika isina kana chii. Ndakabatikana zvakanyanya ndichiona mupurisa akaenda 6 months training anotandanisa kurova nese akaita 4 years ari pachikoro. Ameno kuti kana utungamiriri kana nyika vachizviona amai Munangagwa vane bachero kuchechi semunhu anotya Mwari anoziva Mwari. Kana vatungamiriri, tine vatungamiriri vazhinji vakadzidza kunyika dzese dzatekeshera kuti Zimbabwe vanhu vese vakungopararira anyway. Ichiita chiseko chenyika.
Saka apa ningikiri mai Vena Badze, munoona here kuti vanyori vechidzimai kana vanyori venhau vari kukwanisa here kuita basa ravo rekuti vataure nyaya idzi dzamuri kutaura vakasununguka?
Havana kusununguka totally muZimbabwe. MuZimbabwe hamuna rusununguko zvamu chose. Unotaura wakamira pani, pai, sani, wabuda mbamani.
Saka mazwi amanga hamuinawo amungada kutaurawo vamwe vari kuita mabasa iwaya ekutora nhau, nyanya madzimai vari kuZimbabwe nyanya, nokuti ndivo vari kutarisana nezvimhingampinyi zvakawanda, ndeapi?
Mashoko angu ekushingisa ndeyekutoti kwakutongoshinga semukadzi zvichirwadza zvichigomera zvichiita sei sezvatakaita munguva yehondo saana Chimbwido. Tainotenga masuper pro tichifamba nawo kusina mafoni kusina chii, tikabudirira. Saka zvaakutongoda ushingi nekusimbisana kuti rimwe gore Mwari vachapindira mukati meushingi ihwohwo. Zimbabwe will be somewhere somehow.
Thank you so much, Maita Basa, Mai Vena Badzeva, Tifonera vari South Africa. Thank you very much. I'll come back to you again, Linda Mujuru. You heard what our caller there was saying, especially on the issue of abuse of underage girls. And then I posed the question that, you know, to you, reporting on such issues and very sensitive issues that occur in the country, is it easy for you as a female journalist, or how difficult is it?
Thank you, Marvelous. It's not easy to report on such issues, although they may appear on the surface that they are just issues relating to religion. They are political in nature. So as a female journalist, at times you end up practicing what is called self-censorship because you know the consequences that it might have on you as a person to report on such issues. We all know that the political effects are politically connected sometimes, so it's difficult to report on such issues. Although there are no specific tangible threats that have come to me as a reporter, but because I'm aware of the political connection such an issue might have, I may end up practicing self-censorship because I'm afraid of what might happen to me.
Thank you very much. Let me come back to you, Sharon Jobo. You heard what our young female reporter talking, from Zimbabwe, Linda Mujuru, is saying. So is there any collaboration that can be done with former journalists like yourselves who are operating outside of Zimbabwe, with the young female journalists that are operating in Zimbabwe, like Linda?
Absolutely. I think there is, it's a challenge that we need to accept and work on some specific actions in terms of how we can make it less dangerous and less harmful for the women to operate, especially in the context of Zimbabwe. And at the end of the day, I think it's going to be about generosity, financially supporting initiatives that is perhaps providing, I'm big on technology, providing access to technology, providing connectivity, and also having a means to safe spaces when women need those safe spaces. I'm thinking, for example, of if a woman journalist comes into a situation that needs her to quickly move to a safe space, what is the process? Can they make that call and be quickly removed and placed in a safe space, not just for her, but also for her family? I think those are areas that we need to explore and look into.
Thank you so much. Let me take our caller. Hello, caller Makadi, South Africa. I think our caller cut off, the lines in South Africa and Zimbabwe are a bit problematic today. So thank you to our caller who called in. We'll come back to you again. Linda Mujuru, you work with young minors. Tell us about the kind of experience that you have as a female journalist working in that field.
The mining industry is a very complex industry, which is also difficult to penetrate. So some of the challenges that I have seen working with minors is gaining trust, especially if you are a woman, gaining trust from the sources. We still have this notion within the community that, females, they are looked down upon, and it's a norm, it's common as well with sources. So when I speak to minors, some of them are not so receptive to female journalists. They think that maybe we are not capable. Some of them think that we're not capable of actually producing good journalism.
But let me just come in there, Linda, if I may just ask you, why is it that men worldwide, and this is not just in Zimbabwe, often think that women, when they do something, they are just not good enough, or what do you think has to change for men, especially in the newsroom, the men that have the power in the newsroom, the big bosses? Why is it that they don't think females can also do it? What has to change?
Yeah, it has to change. And I think it's a misconception within society, within the Zimbabwean society. And thirdly, it manifests in the realm of mining, which is manifest in all facets of life. So whatever we see within a patriarchal society, we also see it in the workplace. And this is the case also with some sources. They may see you as not as effective as a male journalist. So that is common. But one way to do that is to gain trust from sources. You do that by writing balanced journalism work and gaining trust over time. If you are writing work that is not balanced, you do not gain trust from your sources. So trust is a process, and it's something that you need to earn as a female journalist. And if you do not have trust, then
Thank you there. Unfortunately, time is not on our side, so I'd like to thank our guests. We had Sharon Jobo, who is a former journalist, and also Linda Mujuru. I would like to also thank you that were live streaming with us, and those listening on radio. You have a very good night. I'm Marvelous Mhlanganya Huye in Washington saying, hey, let's see you again tomorrow.